They buried my only son on a Saturday. By Tuesday, the woman who once called herself my best friend handed me tea and said, "3 more days, then you'll need to go." She thought I'd nod, apologize, disappear. But grief doesn't make you smaller. Sometimes it sharpens you, and I still had the keys. She just didn't know it yet. Saturday was the funeral. A plain pine casket, no flowers except what I brought, 3 stems of white lilies from my garden, trimmed with shaking hands that morning. It was small. He always hated fuss. The pastor called him Joshua, though most people knew him as Josh. My son, my only child, gone in an instant, thanks to a teenager texting through a red light. The boy lived, Josh didn't. That's how the world works sometimes. The air was thick with August heat, the kind that clings to your skin like memory. After the service, people hovered like fruit flies, offering casseroles, cards, awkward shoulder pats. I nodded, smiled, thanked, lied. Yes, I'll be all right. Yes, I have someone staying with me. No, I'm not alone. Only the last part was true. Technically, I wasn't alone. I was with a woman I hadn't seen in 15 years, standing in her driveway with a suitcase and grief packed tight into every zipper. Sharon had driven 3 hours to the funeral. She showed up in a linen dress and too much perfume, arms wide, eyes damp in that performative way she always had, even back in our PTA days. "You can't be alone, Margie." "Not now," she said, already taking my suitcase like she'd rehearsed the gesture. "Stay with me for a while." As long as you need, her house was one of those beige suburban rebuilds, all vinyl siding and solar lights lining the walkway. Inside, everything smelled like cinnamon-scented cleaner and diffused essential oils. Her kitchen glowed with granite and curated fruit bowls. She hadn't changed much, though she'd traded her sarcasm for spirituality somewhere along the way. The first night, we sat on her back deck drinking herbal tea. She told me she'd been doing breathwork and Reiki. I told her my son had died on impact. For the next 2 days, I moved carefully. I didn't want to disturb the harmony of her curated peace. I washed my mug after each use. I folded my blanket each morning and made sure the guest bed was tucked tight enough to bounce a quarter. I didn't speak unless spoken to. Grief, it turns out, can make you quieter than depression ever could. You shrink yourself, fold your sorrow into corners, try not to make a mess. She busied herself. That Tuesday morning, I heard her on the phone while I stood in the hallway, barefoot, pretending to look for something in my purse. "She's barely eating," Sharon was saying. "I just don't know how long this is going to work." I offered help, not a situation that evening. She set chamomile tea in front of me like it was a soft verdict. Then she said it, so calmly I thought I misheard. "I think maybe 3 more days would be good, just so you can get your feet under you. You know, 3 more days." As if grief had a timer. As if mourning had a deadline, like a library book or a casserole dish to be returned. I blinked at her. The mug was still warm under my palms. I said thank you, and I meant it only in the mechanical way you thank someone who hands you a receipt. She smiled, satisfied with herself, and left me to my tea and my silence. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling fan spinning just off balance. The house creaked like it had a guilty conscience. My bag was half packed already, though I hadn't realized it. Grief made me pack light, But I had one thing Sharon didn't know I still had: keys. She thought I was powerless. I was just being polite. I didn't sleep much that night. The ceiling fan made a soft, irregular thump every 7th rotation, enough to keep my thoughts pinned open like wings on a dissecting tray. Around 3, I got up and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The tiles were cold, too clean, like they'd never seen a real mess. I opened the fridge slowly, careful not to wake the house, and stared at the rows of color-coded Tupperware, almond milk, something labeled Chia Overnight Oats. My jar of peach preserves was pushed to the back. Behind a labeled lunch for someone, named Eric, I took it out anyway. That jar was mine, one of the only things in this house that was. The spoon clinked louder than expected. I paused, waited, half hoping Sharon would come downstairs and catch me eating jam in the dark. She didn't. I went back to bed, the taste of peaches lingering like memory. By morning, the world had shifted, not in any grand cinematic way, just in the subtle tilt of glances and silences. Sharon didn't ask how I slept. She didn't ask anything. Around 11, I walked into the living room and noticed my bag was zipped and moved closer to the door. No one mentioned it. The guest towel I'd been using had been replaced with a fresh one folded in thirds. The teacups I washed last night were back in the cupboard, realigned. Even my shoes were straightened at the base of the stairs, soles pointed toward the exit like obedient soldiers. The message was clear. Time to go. That afternoon, while she was on a Zoom call, I heard her say it again, this time to someone named Dana. No, she's still here. I mean, it's a lot. I didn't expect it to be constant. She's not crying or anything, which is weird, right? A pause. I just don't want this energy in the house long term. I went outside. I needed air that hadn't passed through one of Sharon's diffusers. Her backyard was trimmed, square, bland. Plastic hummingbird feeder, a Buddha statue near the fence, half buried in river stones. I sat on a wrought iron bench and stared at the neighbor's maple tree until the sun shifted west. And that's when I saw her. Across the lawn, trimming the hedges with a hand clipper like it was still 1982, was a woman in a sun hat and a denim shirt that had faded with dignity. She waved once, tentative, polite. I waved back. Later that evening, I brought in the mail, mostly junk and a catalog for Sharon that smelled like perfume samples and false promises. There was one envelope addressed to me, no return label. Inside, a sympathy card from a former neighbor back in Allentown. She'd heard about Josh. He was always so kind to my David, it said. I ran my finger over the script and folded the card closed without reading the rest. At dinner, Sharon reheated lentil stew and didn't offer bread. She sat across from me, scrolling her phone while pretending to watch the news. At one point, she glanced up and said, "Have you thought more about your next steps?" I said I had. She smiled. Good. She didn't ask what those steps were. I didn't offer. After she went to bed, I opened the small case I'd brought with me, more like a keepsake box than a suitcase. Tucked inside, between the few folded blouses and a picture of Josh at graduation, was a ring of brass keys. Not just house keys, safe deposit box, storage unit, and 2 old ones I hadn't used in over a decade. One of them had a tiny tag attached, "Back door, Birchwood." Sharon had forgotten, or maybe she thought I would, but I hadn't. In the morning, I walked out the front door and around the block to the house next door, the one with the maple tree and the tidy lawn. I rang the bell. The woman from the yard opened it. Up close, she had the kind of face that didn't rush to smile, but made you feel steadier when it did. "Hi," I said. "I'm Margaret." "I'm staying next door for a few more days." She nodded, wiped her hands on her jeans. "Linda West, I know who you are." There was something in her voice that wasn't pity. It was weight, memory, recognition. "You doing okay?" she asked. I hesitated, then told the truth. "I will be." Linda invited me in without ceremony, just a small gesture toward the kitchen and a "you take coffee?" Her house was a lived-in kind of warm, not magazine perfect like Sharon's, but comforting. There were magnets on the fridge from places I doubted she'd been, but had probably been sent postcards from. A pair of loafers sat neatly by the door. I noticed a mug on the counter with faded lettering that read, "World's Okayest Grandma." I smiled before I could stop myself. She poured coffee without asking how I took it. That kind of confidence made me trust her a little more. We sat at a small round table with one leg that didn't quite reach the floor, and I told her what had happened. Not the whole opera, just the chorus, the funeral, the invitation, the 3-day countdown. Her mouth twitched at that. "I'm not surprised," she said quietly. "I've seen Sharon do this before." That stopped me. "What do you mean?" Linda sipped, then nodded like she was lining up her thoughts before setting them loose. "There was another woman, maybe 6 years ago, older than us. Used to stay here for a few months. Sharon said she was helping her out. Next thing I knew, the woman was gone, and Sharon had a new patio set." I blinked. "You think?" Linda shrugged. "I think Sharon has a pattern. She likes to look generous, so long as it doesn't last too long." We were both quiet for a minute, the kind of silence that stretches out between women who have carried too many secrets in their bones. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the envelope I'd kept sealed since Josh's 2nd year in college. Inside was a letter, Sharon's letter, dated 10 years ago, written in her slanted cursive that always reminded me of speed bumps, elegant but abrupt. It read, "Margie, if anything ever happens, you always have a place here. I know you said not to worry about the loan, but your help saved my home. I wouldn't have made it without you. Consider this place as much yours as mine if the day ever comes. I mean it. Love, Sharon." It wasn't notarized. It wasn't a contract. But it was written proof that this wasn't just some one-sided favor. I had given her $50,000, my late husband's life insurance, and she had given me this letter. And now she wanted me out like I was a squatter. I showed it to Linda. She read it once, then again slower. When she finished, she looked up and said, "You need a lawyer." I nodded. "Already met with one yesterday. Young woman, smart. Says it may be considered a declarative statement of intent, especially since there's proof I helped with the mortgage. But we need more." Linda tapped her finger against the page. "I saw you hand her that check, years ago, on the porch. I remember because I thought, Lord, she's saving her again. You had a white envelope, long, and you were crying." I felt my breath catch. "You're sure? I'm old, not senile." I know what I saw. I leaned back in the chair. For the first time in days, I felt something like gravity shifting back to center. Someone else had seen. Someone else remembered. That night, I made myself a bowl of soup and ate in the guest room. Sharon was in the living room doing yoga, her face lit by a Himalayan salt lamp. She didn't ask where I'd been. I didn't offer. When I closed the door behind me, I reached into my suitcase and pulled out the letter again. I slid it into a fresh envelope, added a sticky note with one word, "Copy," and placed it in my bag next to the keys. I didn't know if this would hold up in court. I didn't know if Sharon would fold or fight, but I knew this much. I wasn't going quietly. And now I had a witness. Linda had always struck me as the sort of woman who could fold a fitted sheet without swearing. Composed, methodical. But when I knocked on her door the next morning with a manila folder in my hand, she opened it already wearing her cardigan, shoes laced. "You'll need a notary," she said before I even asked, "and a pen that doesn't skip." The folder held copies of the letter, my original bank statement from the year I transferred the funds to Sharon's account. $50,000 even, withdrawn in one lump sum. There was no memo line. I hadn't thought to write one back then. I trusted her. That was my mistake. Linda agreed to write a witness affidavit. She was formal about it, wrote it in her neat schoolteacher cursive. The date, what she saw, the color of the envelope, how I handed it over on the front porch. She said, "Thank you," Linda wrote. I remember because her voice cracked when she said it. Like it wasn't the first time I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. Instead, I offered to pay for her time. She looked at me like I'd offered to pay her for brushing her teeth. Meanwhile, Sharon was becoming increasingly short on kindness. That afternoon, she left a printout on the guest room dresser. A list of affordable senior housing resources in the greater Richmond area. Paperclipped to a pamphlet from something called Peaceful Pines Independent Living. I didn't touch it, just folded it in half and slid it under her bedroom door. The next blow came through her son. Eric showed up unannounced one evening, tall, overdressed, smelling like cologne and silent judgment. I was in the kitchen steeping tea when he walked in, like he owned the air. "My mom's been really stressed," he said. "This isn't a good time for guests, you know." "I'm not a guest," I replied calmly. "I'm her obligation." That shut him up for half a beat. He adjusted his jacket. "Look, I know you're going through a lot, but maybe it'd be better for everyone if I disappeared quietly?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I returned to the living room, set my tea on the coaster, and turned on the lamp. Eric lingered for another 10 minutes, walking around the house like a realtor staging it for photos. I caught him glancing at the deed papers in the drawer. They were still in Sharon's name, yes, but that was about to get interesting. The next morning, I met with my attorney, Clara James, in a cramped office above a dentist's suite. She wore flats and kept her coffee in a travel mug labeled "Judge Me Not." I liked her immediately. I handed over the affidavit, the letter, the bank documents. She scanned each item, nodding slowly. "We'll file a temporary injunction," she said, already typing. "Restraining order on the property. Nothing can be sold, transferred, refinanced, or otherwise manipulated until this is resolved." "She's planning something," I said. "I saw a file about a trust." Her son's name was on it. Clara raised an eyebrow. "We'll subpoena the property transfer history. If they initiated anything without notifying you, and you can prove equitable interest." "I can," I said. not waiting for her to finish. By the time I returned home, Sharon was in the garden, stabbing the soil with a trowel like it had insulted her personally. I walked past her without comment. That night, she slammed cupboard doors and made phone calls with the volume just loud enough for me to hear the phrases legal harassment and taking advantage of my generosity. I sat in the guest room with my tea, rereading Linda's affidavit. Her last line stayed with me. I saw what I saw, and I believe Margaret deserves better. That weekend, a letter from the court arrived. Sharon must have opened it by mistake. It was on the hallway table, torn slightly at the corner. Inside, confirmation of the injunction. Clara had moved fast. Sunday morning, Sharon finally snapped. She cornered me by the coffee maker. "You think you're going to take my house?" she hissed. "After everything I did for you?" I met her eyes. "You offered me a place to grieve. You gave me 3 days, but 10 years ago, I gave you this house." She flinched just once, then turned and stormed upstairs. I stirred my coffee. No sugar, no cream, just bitter and strong like the truth. Outside, Linda was pruning roses. She looked up as I stepped onto the porch, gave a small nod like we were women in the same army. And we were. I wasn't fighting for revenge. I was fighting for memory, for dignity, for the right to not be erased. The courtroom wasn't large, just one of those beige municipal rooms, with flickering fluorescents and chairs that reminded you every minute you sat in them that justice wasn't designed for comfort. The seal of the Commonwealth of Virginia hung behind the judge's bench, slightly crooked. I sat at a small table next to Clara, hands folded in my lap, wearing the same navy blouse I'd worn to Joshua's college graduation. He'd told me I looked sharp that day. I hoped I still did. Sharon walked in 5 minutes late, sunglasses still on, trailing a man with a gelled part and shiny shoes who looked like he should be selling commercial real estate, not defending moral bankruptcy. She didn't look at me, just dropped into her seat like someone being inconvenienced at the DMV. The judge was a man in his 60s with a tired face and a nameplate that read on, Gerald Whitmore. He glanced at the case summary, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Let's keep this civil." Clara stood, professional but warm. She presented the affidavit from Linda, the letter Sharon had written, the bank transfer, calm, direct, methodical. "My client does not claim ownership of the property at this time, Your Honor," Clara said, "but she has equitable interest based on financial contribution and written intent from the property holder. We are requesting a temporary injunction preventing any transfer or sale of the residence while the matter is reviewed." Sharon's lawyer, Mr. Gleason, rose with a little too much theater. He used phrases like emotional manipulation and category unverifiable understanding, and even referred to me as Aga, the guest. I didn't flinch. Let him think I was weak. Let him think my silence was surrender. Then Clara called Linda. She walked in steady, wearing her good slacks and a thin gold brooch, swore in with a voice that didn't waver. She gave her full name, Linda West, occupation, retired educator. And then she told the truth. She described the porch, the envelope, the thanks. She described the day I gave Sharon the money. "It was July," she said. "Margaret was crying." She handed over that check like it was a limb, and Sharon hugged her and said, "Now I'll be able to breathe again." That's what she said. I remember Gleason tried to rattle her, asked how she could be so certain so many years later. I remember because I couldn't believe someone would give that much without a contract, Linda said, her voice even. But then again, Margaret's always had a kind heart. And Sharon's always known how to use it. Silence followed. Not dramatic courtroom silence, just the kind where no one has anything left to say that won't make them smaller. The judge didn't decide everything that day. He granted the injunction: no transfers, no refinancing, no changes to the property without notification and review. Temporary stay, pending further documentation and mediation, he said. Clara squeezed my shoulder. It's a win. Outside, Sharon brushed past me in the parking lot without a word. Her jaw was locked so tight I thought she might chip a molar. Her son wasn't with her. Maybe he was finally tired of pretending this wasn't ugly. That night, I sat at Linda's kitchen table again. She poured 2 glasses of iced tea and said, "They think being quiet means being weak. That's where they're always wrong." I smiled, tired but steady. She wanted me gone in 3 days. I'll be here for at least 3 months now. Long enough to make them uncomfortable, Linda said, raising her glass. Long enough to remind them I'm not done, I replied. We clinked glasses, like generals drawing maps. I wasn't planning revenge. I was building a boundary, with law, with truth, with names written in ink. And this time, the story would be mine to end. 3 weeks later, the final hearing was brief and almost anticlimactic. The judge reviewed additional records Clara had submitted. Copies of old email exchanges, timestamps of wire transfers, a notarized statement from the notary who'd handled Sharon's mortgage refinancing 10 years back. The dots connected like constellations. Nothing explosive, just facts, layered neatly enough to tip the scales. Sharon didn't look at me once during the proceedings. Her lawyer spoke softer this time, more measured. They'd changed strategies, less attack, more damage control. I suppose they realized it was no longer about eviction. It was about exposure, reputation, consequences. The judge ruled in my favor. Not full ownership, Clara hadn't even pushed for that, but a formal acknowledgement of my financial stake and the legal right to continued residence, or alternatively, a buyout settlement reflecting my original contribution plus interest. Sharon opted for the latter. She didn't want me in that house a day longer than necessary. I took the money. I didn't even blink. Within a week, I had a certified check in hand and 2 real estate listings circled on a notepad by the window. The first one I toured was a small cedar-shingled cottage in western North Carolina, about 20 minutes from Asheville. Lake view, modest, blue shutters, the kind of place with porch steps that creak and neighbors who wave whether they know you or not. I made an offer that afternoon, paid in full. The realtor blinked like she hadn't expected that. I'm not here to negotiate, I told her. I'm here to live. Packing was easy. I left behind more than I took. Gave Linda a quilt I'd made with Josh's baby clothes, stitched into the lining. Left a note for Sharon, not bitter, not dramatic. Just 4 lines written in calm hand. I didn't take your house. I took back my story. You misjudged my grief for weakness. That was your last mistake. I turned in the key she gave me the day after Josh's funeral. The other key, the one I'd kept all these years, slid into the drawer of my new nightstand. beside a photograph of my son and a bookmark that still smelled faintly of lavender. My first night in the cottage, I sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee. No diffuser humming, no tension in the walls, just frogs in the distance and the creak of wood settling around me like an exhale. Linda had called earlier that day. "You settled in?" "I am." "You regret anything?" "No," I told her. "I think I just forgot for a while that I had a spine. Thanks for reminding me." She laughed. "You didn't forget. You just stored it somewhere safe until you needed it." She was right. Grief doesn't erase you. It just folds you in for a while, like a tide. But eventually, you come up for air. You put your feet down and feel ground again. And you walk, maybe slower than before, maybe with a little ache, but forward. I never did hear from Sharon again. And I'm not waiting. I didn't win a house. I reclaimed my name, my place, my strength. And sitting here now, the lake breathing in the dark, I realize I didn't leave to escape. I left to begin.